Well, I guess we're getting a little late start. My apologies, but I'm glad to see you guys. And we'll see if other people choose to join us today. They've all been invited. So, oh, there's somebody. Great. Okay. So, yeah, this happens in a lot of classes. Like, we get a huge sign up, and then like a trickle of people come to the calls. So that's fine. That's why I send them out. So, but it's great to see you guys. Dina, where are you? You're sitting outside somewhere.
Sitting outside somewhere, and it's quite noisy where I am. So forgive me. I'll probably stay silent after this and
Okay.
just participate. But I was able to find the moment. So
Nice. I'm glad you're here. Great. Awesome.
messy.
Hi, Pamela. How are you?
Good. How are you?
Doing well?
Do you have, okay, I have my mic on.
Yeah, we can hear you. Yep, it's all good.
Sorry I missed last week.
That's okay.
I had back-to-back meetings, so
Hopefully you got a chance to watch the recording and you have
I
it.
did watch the recording. That was great. Thank
Good.
you.
Good. Yeah, those recordings live on my YouTube and they're unlisted, so only people who have the link from the class can find them. And so you guys can go back to them again and again if you ever want to see to just to refresh or whatever. So great.
Can I ask a question about
Yeah,
that?
please.
I think it's just when you put something in the chat,
Yeah.
like a link or something,
Yeah.
can I get that?
Yes. So, but I think I sent it with the email last week.
Okay.
Do you know what it was in the chat?
I
Was
I
lesson
think there
two?
was a reading or something. I can't remember now, but
It was probably the lesson two. So I'm going to put it in the chat
oh,
here.
I have
Download
that. I have that.
Okay. Yeah.
So,
And then I usually put the writing prompts in there too, but I also say them. So hopefully you could see those, when you were watching the recording.
yeah, I think what happened, I watched it on my iPad
Oh,
and I can't see the chat icon for some reason on my screen on the iPad. I can
well,
on my Mac, but
okay. I think if you're live, you'll be able to see it. It'll be an option. But you might have to figure out where it is. But when it's a recording, I don't think you can. So
okay,
yeah.
gotcha.
I just put lesson 3 in the chat and I will send it in the email for anybody who's getting this later. So now you have it. And how's it going? Anybody have any questions or anything? We're midway through a 4-week class. So we have this week and next week, which will be the normal time next week. But any questions, thoughts, concerns, something you're noticing in your writing, anything at all before we jump into this week's lesson?
I'm reading a novel called something. Monica, I'll get it in a minute.
Okay.
But it's called a novel.
Yep.
But it's also a memoir. And it's a really, she's a much better writer than I am. I mean, it's really literature, but it's so interesting that she calls it a novel, but it's both her imagining what happened and then mixed with facts, and then she'll say, and my daughter died, and I Googled her, or did die. It's so interesting that it really is her coming to terms with her family history, calling it a novel, but then having facts. She just calls it a novel. Like, I've been struggling with family memoir because I don't know what, and I have all different kinds of things. But for those of us that are writing about our families and stuff, I'll put it in the chat, the name of it. It's really interesting.
It's really tough because people come up with all kinds of names for genres now, and the reality is either you're mostly making up with maybe some inspiration from real life, or you're mostly telling truth and filling in blanks that you can't find the truth for. That's really, really what it is. And so, and even when we write memoir, like memoir is different from autobiography because autobiography is supposed to be completely truthful. Memoir is understood to be to the best of your memory, but there's a lot of liberties taken. So you have to know that when you're reading a memoir that like they did the best they could, but you can't possibly remember everything, so you're filling it in. And so I don't know if there is something called like a memoiristic novel or nonfiction novel. I don't know, but
She called it a novel, which is so but I mean, and she even starts out telling us that she's making stuff up. She says, imagine a coloring book.
Yeah.
So, and so, I mean, because I used one little thing that I said, I can just imagine it. So I'm telling the reader,
Yeah.
this is my imagination, right? So, you know, so that it's just beautifully done and nicely written. And I will put it in the chat right now.
That's great. Cool. Anybody else have questions or anything you want me to spend some time on before we jump into the lesson? No? Cool. Okay, so details are a huge part of showing rather than telling. So we're going to spend some time today talking about both specific and concrete details and how we can add them into our writing to make it come to life. So I'm actually, I think what I'd like to do is start you off writing, and then we'll get into some lesson if you don't mind. So what I'd like you to do is to take a few random details in a scene and explore different ways to show the scene. So the details are all the same. We're going to write 2 different scenes using these details. And they're all going to come up different because you guys all have different perspectives. So the details are, and I'll put them in the chat as well, but here, I'm going to put them in right now. Rain, a clock, a restaurant, a window, pancakes, and an envelope. So these are some details. You can get more detailed about it. You could show us the rain. You could have us hear the clock, whatever. But I'd like those to be the ones you play with. And the very first scene that I'd like you to do is to use these details in a scene as narrated by an angry old man. So just write a scene. It could be a paragraph, doesn't have to be long, where you use these different details, but the narrator is an angry old man. So let's take, I mean, what do you think? Like 6 minutes? Does that sound like enough? Yeah? Okay, we'll take 6 minutes and we'll come back at 43. Okay, so that was super fast. 6 minutes flies by. But let's just pivot to the next one and give it a shot. And you can spend a little more time. I'll give you 10 minutes to do the second one or finish the first one. But the second one is to use the same details in a scene narrated by a scared girl. So let's take 10 more minutes. We'll go to 53 and see if you can play around with these two narratives. Okay? All right, so let's wrap up the writing. Does anybody want to share one of the scenes you wrote or talk about how it went? Yeah, Tim.
I can read.
Okay, thanks.
So the second one,
Uh-huh.
she had never seen rain like this. It wasn't coming down in drops, it was coming down in streams. The rain and dark clouds made the night sky even darker, and even with her high beams on, she couldn't see the road. She looked down at her dashboard clock for just a second, and that's when she heard the sound that scared her to her core. Ba-boom, ba-boom. She had run over something. She looked out her rear window and saw that whatever she had hit was still alive. Damn it, she screamed as she pounded her steering wheel. She cracked open her door and was immediately drenched by the rain. As she slowly approached the body, she was whispering Hail Marys. There was a body, a man's body, an old man's body. Immediately, she noticed the envelope the old man was clutching in his hand. The address was written in crayon. She fell to her knees and froze when a set of headlights came fast over the hill.
Nice. Beautiful. Can't wait to see where it goes.
Wait, I didn't hear pancakes, did I?
Nope, but that's okay. Sarah, you went mute.
I thought we had to use them all.
It's ideal, but it's only a few minutes. So if you can't, you can't. You do the best you can. Anybody else want to share or talk about how it went? Okay. So what we want to talk about today is the details, because when you get specific, like really specific and concrete, things that are tangible that we feel we can touch or see or know in some way, that's really the core of showing. And so I want you to think about a couple of things when you're including details in your writing. So the first one is, why is your character looking at these details? The details have to matter to the character or the story. So that's important. We can't just throw it in to get specific, but it doesn't make any sense. So that's number one. Number two is to think about, if you've written a draft of something and it needs to sort of show more, it's been a lot of telling, what you could do is ask yourself what details are going to be important to the point of view of the piece, to that character. How could we get more specific to show more of where they are? And that a lot of this happens in the revision. A lot of showing happens in the revision process because, first drafts are messy. I've said it before, and it's always true for me. You write and you get it out, and then you go back and you make it pretty. So what details are going to be important to this character, to this scene? The third one is to think about, what is the mood or the tone of the writing, and how could you introduce details that relate to that mood or that show that mood? So if you want it to be gloomy, then maybe it's the color of the sky, or maybe it's the shadows in a room, or maybe, things like that. Like these details can really set a tone, can transmit a mood to the reader. So details are really the way that we want to make our stories come to life. And it's one of the best ways to show, one of the easiest ways to show. So I want to look at 3 examples of details and description, and I want to see which one you guys like best. So I'm going to share the lesson, and you'll see here, this is 1, this is 2, this is 3. So could somebody read the first one for me, please?
I'll read. The room was small and overstuffed with items from all over the world. Vases from France, statuettes from Italy, wooden shoes from Holland. A bold green and red flowered wallpaper covered 3 of the walls, with the 4th wall a solid matching shade of green. On that wall sat a carved trellis with silk flowers entwined through it. Toy birds perched on top like bright lights.
Thank you. So it feels like this paragraph is specific and detailed, but we're going to evaluate them in comparison to each other. But as it stands right now, I'm having a hard time seeing the scene. I don't know about you guys. There's a lot of details, but a picture's not coming together for me. And I don't know why yet. So let's look at number 2 and see how it's any better. So it's, Tim, do you want to read that?
Chuck Gept, holy crap, a garage sale threw up in here. Old vases, cheesy statuettes, those dumb clogged shoes with the flowers on them. Bad enough every surface had something awful on it, but did she really need that wallpaper? Maybe she didn't know red and green flowers just screamed, I'm way too into Christmas and need professional help. And what was with the trellis with the fake vines and cheap plastic birds?
Thank you. So while we don't have France or Italy or Holland, we have a tone, right? There's like a sense of, frustration, of judgment. And it's the same items, but shown in a different way. It's a very, very different story. Now, let's look at number 3 and see what you think about that. So do I have a volunteer who wants to read number 3?
I will, Lynn.
Thanks.
The small room overflowed with items claimed from all over the world. Elegantly curved vases from France, buxom statuettes from Italy, quirky wooden shoes from Holland, each purchased in a moment of childish delight. Shelves of such treasures lined 3-flowered walls of green and red, facing the subdued 4th wall in a solid matching shade of green. That was reserved for the garden, such as it was. Silk flowers cascaded down a carved trellis, peppered with toy feathered birds, bright as holiday lights.
Thank you. So what do you guys think about these 3 different versions? Like, which one do you like better and why? Or, what's the effect of the different ways that the details are treated?
I like the middle one just because I can relate.
Yeah, there's a personality to it, right?
Yeah.
We actually learn a lot about the character from that paragraph without being told, really being shown. And there's just a little quick line of dialogue or internal dialogue that gives us a sense of character. But all the other descriptions were from Chuck's perspective. And so we already know this character, like in one paragraph, right? Just from the details. And we haven't said anything about Chuck. We haven't said a word about Chuck, but now we know him, right? Anybody else have a different opinion?
It's not a different one, but I can't really compare the 2, liking one over the other, because they're doing, as you say, different things.
Yeah.
And the part I like in this 3rd one is it purchased in a moment of childish delight. So that puts it into a context for you.
Right.
That in the right in somewhere else in a story, this would be, I think, a decent paragraph to have.
Yeah, I think that's really true, Sarah. So when I look at these examples, the first one is highly detailed, but I can't see anything. It feels very cluttered to me, and I don't know where this room is or whose room it is or what the significance is. I don't know if I like it or I don't like it. To me, it's very alienating. The second paragraph definitely has a character and a tone. Same room, but now we have sort of a sense of a character and his reaction to this room. And I could definitely see it. And because of his reaction, I have an opinion now. The third example is a totally different tone. And I'm like in the second example, I think the person who owns the stuff is really tacky. In the third example, I think this is a fun person who's traveled a lot. And it's the same details. So it's really important to see how you can tweak the specifics to achieve a goal, to achieve, a tone to it. And so it's really important because in the first paragraph, technically, you are getting specific, but I don't think it's successful. because it's just listing and there's no cohesion, there's no purpose, there's no reason for it. And so the reader stays distant. And so you see how, okay, we need specific and concrete details, but they have to have a reason or a purpose in our writing. Absolutely. So, I would say use these as examples to think about when you're writing something, how can you use the details that you include to set a tone or to show a character or to move the story along? So it's in a context. Does that make sense? Any questions about that? Okay, cool. So there is descriptive showing and there's descriptive telling. And I would say the first example was descriptive telling, and the second and third were descriptive showing. So ways to avoid the telling is that you make sure the character is doing the describing, not the author. And that's really important. That goes for everything we'll talk about. So, we talked about info dumps, I think a little bit last week, and we'll talk about it more. But an info dump is when you just shove a bunch of information in because you got to get it in, but it doesn't benefit the characters or doesn't move the story along. It's really for you, the author, to get that information or backstory in. That's never useful. It's only useful if it's germane to the story. So make sure when you're using descriptive showing, it's the character doing the describing, not the author. That's number one. Number two is that every detail should be important for the character or the narrator to comment on, and the comment should reflect something about that character or narrator. So it's not just because we put a detail in there and we have to do something with it. It needs to relate, and it needs to show us something about who's noticing it. There needs to be a connection, a relationship. The other thing is that we don't want to use conditional. So for example, Bob could see from the way Jane was acting, she was upset. That is descriptive telling. Bob could see from the way Jane was acting, she was upset. I can't see any of that. And I don't really know what Bob is seeing, right? So let's flip it and say Jane threw a book at his head and stormed out of the room. We don't have Bob in that sentence, but we definitely know that Jane is upset. And so she's actively doing something through a book. So that's a verb, it's an action. At his head, we're going to meet Bob at some point, and stormed out of the room. So stormed is like an active verb as well. And suddenly it's a very different scene. Suddenly I'm part of it and I can see it. Whereas when Bob could see I'm not there. I'm just like, okay, very nice for Bob, right? So just make sure that you can try and remove the conditional. And then the other thing is that when you are using details and you say the sound of, the sound of the rain, we think we're being descriptive, but replace the sound of with the actual sound. So here's an example. The sound of a rifle echoed through the valley, as opposed to the crack of a rifle shot echoed through the valley. See the difference? So these are things you can look for. You guys have the notes, you have the lesson. So when you go through the revision phase of your writing, you can say, oh, I did the sound of, or, oh, it smelled like, or, why don't I just show it? Or, it felt like, no, just show it. The uneven ridges of the table, as opposed to, it felt like the ridges were uneven, or, just let us feel it. Let us feel the unfinished wood or whatever it is. So the last thing is to ask yourself if any of a scene's characters were involved in the details or the backstory that you want to share. So like if you have to include some backstory, is it important to the characters and what's happening in your story now? And this is both for nonfiction and fiction. So you want to ask yourself questions about the character, like how does the character feel about it? How does this detail, this backstory motivate their choices and move the story along? So always ask yourself, why does this matter to the character? Why does this matter to the story? And then that will be something that you can do, in a more showing way. So any questions so far? Okay, so this sounds really basic, but it needs saying. We show by using the 5 senses. That's a super great way to introduce details, the 5 senses. And always ask yourself, have I done that recently? And if not, that's a great tool. Strong nouns. So again, like, I don't know if a vase from France is a strong noun, or maybe we see a porcelain painted vase. I don't know. I'm just making it up, but I'm sure it could be better. But a strong noun, active verbs we've talked about, and adjectives that describe qualities. So adjectives that relate to the characters in the story. So let's look at some ways of doing 5 senses. Okay. So anybody have any thoughts about this or challenges that you faced when you write, or do you not think about using the senses? Like, how does it factor into your writing? Yeah, Tim. Yeah.
Sometimes when I write, like I just throw it down on paper
Uh-huh.
and then look at it and make a list of what the 5 senses are for whatever I'm writing about.
Okay.
Like recently, I was like writing about going back, like my high school and what it was like entering for the first time.
Yeah, that's cool.
And, you can tell what it is, but then if you can give like the high school itself, like human qualities and the 5 senses, what it smelled, how the steps felt, like all that's usually how I do it, is just get the framework for whatever it is down,
Okay.
and then think about the 5 senses,
Okay.
5 senses, and just make a list of what applies.
Great. Great. Yeah, in whatever order works for you, but it's so important to include those senses. That alone, if that's the only thing you take from this class, using the senses in your writing, it'll elevate your writing tenfold. There's no question. But we have to remember, and certain senses are harder than others. Like scent is one of the hardest senses to write about. It's amazing when it's done well, because like, think about how a certain scent or smell reminds you of a time in your life. That scent is very, very powerful. It just triggers memories, it elicits emotions, but it's really hard to do. And I always use the example of smelled like cinnamon. So it doesn't really describe the scent. You have to know what cinnamon smells like to understand that comparison. It is a really, really hard one to do. So when you can do scent well, then that's a great skill. So I challenge you to try that in your writing. Touch is the most urgent sense because it's vital to humans. And so, I mean, like, the fact is that babies who aren't cuddled and touched fail to thrive. So we need touch. And so it can be a very powerful builder of relationships in your writing, or connection with the reader too, because touch is so essential to us. So examine textures, like, what is the texture of this sweater, or this, like, whatever it is, the desk, like anything around you, practice it. Practice touching things and then just journaling. Like, what does this feel like? How can I recreate this for the person on the page? Taste is actually a really social sense, because we eat with people, we gather over meals and things like that. It's also very sensual, and describing how things taste is just a lot of fun to do. So again, like, I invite you, your next meal, like, how would you write about it? It could be basic, it could be macaroni and cheese, but like, how do you describe that in a sensory fashion so that the reader is like salivating and wanting to make some themselves? And then finally, sound and sight. So sound is pretty complex, but it really lifts your writing, because when you can start to hear the sounds, it becomes multidimensional, and it's like you're in the story. So, when you hear thunder cracking and booming, like, you kind of want to burrow under your blanket, or when you start to hear music in some way, you feel like moving as you're reading. So it can be a lot of fun. It can be sounds from outside. It could be sounds from inside. Like, I write a lot about, the sound of somebody's heart beating or pulsing, like, in the feel of it. Sometimes, I don't know about you, but like, sometimes it'll beat in my temples, and I'm like, that's a great detail. Let's include that for a character when it makes sense, because that is such a personal, intimate sound as well as feel that, the reader can relate. And then sight is the easiest, because we see everything. And so we can use them in tandem with some of these other senses. Like, you see your food first. There's a saying, I'm going to hack it apart, but if food doesn't look good, we don't want to eat it. And so it's very interesting. It could still be delicious, but people sort of recoil when it looks like mush or like a brown paste or whatever. But like it could be great, but it's the sight first. We eat with our eyes before we eat with our mouths. So think about those senses when you're writing, and if you can ever weave together more than one sense, even better. So I would like to share a piece of writing with you guys. And there are 3 in this week's lesson. I don't think we'll get to all 3 because I do want to give you a chance to do a little bit more writing today. But let's read a piece and let's look for the use of specific and concrete details. And then we can talk about how what we liked and what was successful. So this is from a journal called Copper Nickel, which I love. I think it's just phenomenal. And it's a piece called Montauk. So I'd love to have some volunteers to read. So here in section 1, would somebody like to read it for us? Anybody? Yeah, Tim, thank you so much.
Josh found his mother crouched on the floor across the room from her suitcase, an open-mouthed beast in vinyl she received as a wedding gift in the 1960s. She'd never used it, and now it was making a messy meal of her blouses and medical devices. Heating pad for crumbling vertebrae, nebulizer for lungs. I'm not going, she said, over the rattling of her own body. Josh repacked her. Lucas had called this a fool's errand. Lucas and his cliches and his pessimism annoyed Josh, but maybe he was right. Josh took all the things out of the suitcase that his mother wouldn't need. Ziploc bags containing photographs he'd published, acceptance letters from nursing school she'd never attended, prayers on index cards. Oh my God, I'm heartily sorry for having offended thee. He removed his father's last wallet, a scrap of paper with Josh's old cell number inside. His dad had never dialed it, had only spoken to him in clipped sentences since Josh first brought Lucas home from Montauk. To think he'd been excited to introduce them, giddy even. He'd had so much hope that his parents would love Lucas too. Now he carefully folded each piece of clothing like his mother had taught him when she'd sent him off to college 30 years ago. Cross country via Amtrak by himself. This is a lot of sweaters, Mom. Can you pick just one? His mother retreated into the hug of the drapes, which stood at attention, ready to fend off the dawn. Josh chose the sky blue sweater because his mother always looked happy in blue, even if she wasn't. She rarely was. When the suitcase was ready, his mother refused to rise. He put his hands under her arms to help her to her feet, but she went boneless like a child. He scooped her up and she grasped at the long hair of his beard. I'm doing this for you, he said. Carrying her to the car, he was surprised how light she was compared to her suitcase.
Thank you. And then section 2, can I have a volunteer to read that?
I'll read.
Thanks, Sarah.
The windshield wiper stopped working an hour from home. Josh got out of the car in the driving rain. He wished Lucas had come. Lucas was the one in their relationship who could repair what broke. Your mother doesn't want me here, he'd said. She and Lucas had a lot in common, love of the evening news and black licorice and animals that others found ugly. Sorry. But she still didn't know. She still didn't know it. Josh wondered if they should turn back. What was the point anymore? Eventually, he got one wiper going. One was enough. His mother checked her seatbelt, made sure the window was closed. She looked behind them as they got farther and farther from the Illinois border, from her flat town of single-story homes near the Caterpillar factory. He'd made a playlist of songs by decade he thought she might like, but the rain was so noisy they couldn't hear unless he turned it up too loud. The feedback in her hearing aids was terrible. Instead, he told her about dipping his hand in the surf in Montauk, how much better the water was than any other water. It could change a person. He described the glaciers and the deserts he'd photographed for work, the oysters Lucas had pulled from the coast of Chiloé and shucked them for him with a key. If she was listening, he couldn't tell. It had always been like that between them. You're going to love the ocean, he said, when they stopped overnight in the roadside motel outside Harrisburg.
Thank you. And then we have section 3. Pam, would you mind reading it? You're on mute though. You're still on mute. I'm sorry. There you go.
Thanks. Sorry.
It's okay.
Okay, so my screen was bouncing back and forth and I'm trying to find exactly where you stopped.
Number 3, it was late afternoon.
There it is. It was late afternoon when they arrived to the end of Long Island. Josh steered the car head on into the sand, setting the water before his mother like a painting on an easel. Pretty streaks of pink pierced the cloud cover, but the water itself was a muddy blue. He wished it were bluer. He felt angry at the ocean for not looking its best at a time like this. When he'd met Lucas on this exact beach 20 years before, the water had been the kind of blue that makes a person fall in love. Josh removed his mother's shoes and rolled up her pants. "You can't half fill a suitcase, Josh," she said, smoothing a crease on her knee. "If you leave empty space, everything shifts around. The clothes get wrinkled." "You're right. I'm sorry." The sand was hard for her to walk on, so he held her around the waist in case she stumbled. She did, but only once. Refusing the chair he unfolded for her, she walked down the gentle slope to the shore alone, her steps steadier on the packed wet sand. When the cold blue touched her toes, she didn't recoil the way most people do. She walked straight into the autumn waves until they crashed up to her shins, tugging her back and forth like a reed that had always been there, that already knew this life. His mother stayed planted in the water a long time, taking deep, salty breaths as the contents of the Atlantic rushed toward her and away from her, toward her and away. The litter and krill and shipwreck. Someone else's memories, her son's memories. Josh concentrated on the swirls of sea foam at their feet so he wouldn't cry. At dusk, his mother took a Ziploc from the pocket of her sweater, filled it with sea, and asked him to take her home. "Lucas's eyes are the color of that ocean," was the only thing she said on the long drive west across Long Island.
Yeah, thank you. So, thoughts, details, anything?
I thought it was very moving.
Yeah. But how does the author achieve this? You know, like what makes it moving to us?
I think the son's realization that as he's talking, he's focused on completely different things and people, and she's only kind of in and out. He's showing, her focus is not on the present so much.
Right.
Just by what he's describing, he invokes that.
Okay.
And the sadness that comes with that.
Uh-huh.
By describing her, what he's focused on versus what she's focused on.
Yeah, and I think the details are what really drive it home, right?
Yes.
So it's interesting because we start with the suitcase, and forgive me because I'm going to go up and down, and we get back to the suitcase. Like here we're at, you can't half fill a suitcase, so there's parallelism here, and there's like nice full circle that this comes because, Lucas's eyes are the color of that ocean. And up here, we have, where do we have? This trepidation that his parents aren't going to love Lucas. And then the sky blue sweater. So the blues are following us through the whole piece, which I think is really cool. His mother always looked happy in blue. it's just interesting how, the specific details follow through this story, and we get to the bottom and we feel this sense of full circle closure. Sarah?
Yeah, I think it's a wonderful story, and he never tells us, he never tells us what's going on. He totally shows us.
Right.
And
Yeah.
it's even starting with his mother crouched, like that sets it up. But the thing I like is the Ziploc bags, because when she left, she put things that were important to her in the Ziploc bags. And
Yes.
when she leaves, she takes something that's important to her back.
And I get chills. Yeah. Right.
Ziploc bag. I love the blue. Yeah, you notice the blue thing, but he never tells us what's going on. He simply shows us.
This is all seen. This is all very strategic detail. And also the hug of the drapes, by the way. I love the hug of the drapes. I love that kind of thing, like the hug of the hills or whatever. And he basically carries her to the car like a child. But then down here, he's kind of hugging her as he's helping her down to the shore. There's a lot of parallelism here, but it's very active. It's very vivid. And it's because of the details. It's because of the verbs too. The verbs are pretty good throughout. Other thoughts, anybody? Anything we haven't noticed, or a favorite detail maybe? I mean, I love like pretty streaks of pink pierced the cloud cover. So we have some alliteration with the P's, and pierce is a very, it's an active verb for an inactive scene, which I think is cool. It sort of made me pay attention. But right beforehand, setting the water before his mother like a painting on an easel, and then pretty streaks of pink pierce the cloud cover continue that artistic vision. It's the language is incredible.
But also the idea of a painting is, it's like this whole thing is a painting.
Yes.
Right?
Yeah.
Because they're scenes. I mean, that's what paintings are.
Yeah, for sure. For sure. Dina?
It's not a direct detail, but I'd love to offer that I mentioned that is really grappling with abstractness.
Yeah.
And I feel that this piece teeters on, but places you because of the detail.
Yeah.
With the value of the abstract without telling you exactly what's happening.
Yes.
But the invitation is the detail, and it's nice to see that nuance.
Yeah, absolutely. I also want to show you guys that it's not all showing. You can never have all showing. You have to have a balance. I prefer more showing than telling, but there are times we have to tell. So for example, the sand was hard for her to walk on. That's telling. So he held her around the waist in case she stumbled. That's showing. And so that's like a nice balance. Up here, it was late afternoon when they arrived on the end of Long Island. That's telling. But then we have Josh steered the car head on into the sand, setting the water before his mother like a painting on an easel. And it continues to show in that paragraph, but it starts with telling. So it's really important to understand that balance.
I'm talking about, he's not telling us what's going on. He's showing, like, the story is telling, instead of saying, I went to get my mother and see if she could come live with me in Lucas,
Right.
He never says that. He just.
No. I wasn't talking about your comment, Sarah. I was just explaining that in all showing, we have to have a balance with telling. And so, but it's strategic, it's not lazy, because sometimes often telling and writing is lazy, and showing is what takes effort. And so it's the kind of thing that you have the tools, and so you put in the time, and that's what elevates the writing, Okay, so I want to give you 2 writing prompts and give you about 15-ish minutes to work on them, so you can decide which one works best for you. And then we can share what you come up with. So it gives you some time. So I put them in the chat. The first prompt is to introduce your reader to one of your favorite places, describing the location using sensory and concrete details so that the reader feels like they're there with you. The other one is to write about making a favorite recipe using choice details. You can narrate the process, you can purchase ingredients, you can chop and dice and saute and boil and whatever. And you can even sit down and eat at the end. You can take us at any point of the recipe, but just to really make it sensory rich and detail rich. So choose one of them. Obviously, take the other prompt for your pleasure after the call. So we're at 27 after. So I'm going to say we're going to go until about 45. Okay. And happy writing. Cool. Okay, so we're in our last minute. Hi, Laura. Nice to see you. I can't hear you. All right, so Pam, I'm inviting you back too. Our class has shrunk. 3 people have left. And we had a small class to begin with. A lot of people didn't come. So it's intimate now. Sorry, Laura, that your microphone isn't working. That's a bummer. You could join on your phone if you wanted to, and then maybe we could hear you. It's up to you. So how did that go? How is the writing? I guess I would say, Laura, type in the chat, or Pam, do you want to speak?
I just was noticing that when I write like this, when we do these little things,
Yeah.
It's not bad, but it's a mess. Like I scribble things out, add things in, and then I have a hard time following what I'm saying. But
Yeah.
you know, it's the first messy draft. So
Of course.
it was great. It was
Yeah.
fun.
You know, I do a lot of nature writing, and I was wanting to write about a kayaking excursion that my daughter and I did in Hawaii last August. So what I did was I wrote down everything I could remember about the sensory details, and then I looked up some pictures of the place, or the pictures we took as well, because I obviously it's been a while, and I took notes on that to get the details down. And then I did research about like where we were and where we went, and just so I could learn more about it. And then I wrote the piece. And so that can be really a helpful process if you want to add more details to your writing, is to think it through ahead and think about, well, what do I need to gather so that I can be detailed? Because it can be really hard, especially if we're writing from memory, or it's a place we're not as familiar with. It's really important to look up that stuff ahead of time. And I put it on like a document next to the one I'm writing in so that I can refer to it, and it helps to have the details at hand. So yeah.
I put up a picture of the place that I was trying
Nice.
to write about. That helped.
Perfect.
Sutton's Bay, by the way, Lynn.
What?
Sutton's Bay.
Ah, I love it. That's so cool. I love that. Very, very cool. Well, and so if you didn't have just 15 minutes, you could like look at the picture and you could jot down the details you wanted to use, and you could think about memories, and you could think about like, you could take those notes, and then the notes become the raw material that you use to write the piece. So I find that to be a really empowering approach for myself, because then I have like something to work with before I start writing, you know?
I think that's the only way I can figure out how to do it.
Yeah.
So
Yeah, one of the things I've resisted throughout my career is that writing requires planning. I'm like, I just want to be taken by the creative muse. And no, when I plan it out, it's much better. So sometimes thinking it through and being like, what am I trying to say with this piece? And let me remember all the details and stuff. It helps. It helps, you know?
it definitely helps. I have a messy mind.
Yeah.
So doing things like that helps a lot.
Ideas like pinballing around, you know? Laura, I understand. You said you didn't get far. It was messy like Pam's, and that's normal. I mean, it was quick and it's like on the fly, but maybe you can sort of marinate with the topic as you go forward and see what you guys come up with. So, well, because it's just 3 of us and we only have 2 microphones working, are there any last questions you guys want to ask me for this week before we come to our last session together next week? Anything that I can give to you, since we're just the 3 of us here, and any personal attention you might want?
I have a question that's totally kind of off in left field. If
Throw it out there.
no other questions.
Yeah.
So I have this general idea in my head as a starting point for a story that I want to use archival records and create a character. But first of all, figuring out which archival records to look at and how to narrow it down to start with, because otherwise it's just like this huge thing that I'm going to spend way too long trying to figure out the
Yeah.
starting point of.
So, is it a real person you want to write about?
Not yet, but that depends on what I find in the archives.
Oh, so you want to go like shopping around in an archive to find ideas for a character. Got it.
Or inspiration.
Okay, so it just depends on like where you are and what's near to you. So like my husband is an archivist at the Reuther Library at Wayne State University, but University of Michigan has archives, like lots of universities do, but then there are other places like museums have archives, you know, like sometimes bands, like the Grateful Dead has an archivist, so like I don't know if it's open to the public or not, but
That's funny.
what I might do if I were you is Google archives near you,
Okay.
and or if there's a specific theme, like so my next novel that I'm writing right now takes place both in Scotland and in Michigan, and I always write Jewish characters, and so I looked for Scottish Jewish archives, and there's one in Glasgow, and so I'm actually going to Scotland next month to do some on the ground research for my book. But it was like I narrowed it down to the idea of Scotland and Jewish, and then I could see what existed. And so, and there's national archives, but there's Scottish Jewish, and I thought, okay, that makes it much more narrow. So you might want to do that too. Like, are there certain
Okay.
eras of history or communities you want to look at, or something like that?
Okay. There is I don't know if you probably know about it, but there's it's either a women's library. I think it's a women's library in Glasgow that's supposed to be really wonderful.
Okay, cool.
It's either a women's museum or women's library, and I'm pretty sure it's a library.
Awesome. Thank you. I will check it out.
Yeah.
Laura, did you have any questions that you might want to put in the chat or anything that I could answer for you? No? Okay. Cool. Pam,
You
anything
lost
else?
everybody?
So yeah, we did. Well, so Tim had a client thing and Sarah wasn't feeling well, and I'm assuming Dina had to go because she's traveling. So,
Right.
and I don't know where everybody else is, but when all of you watch this video, we missed you. So there you go. All right, next week, regular time, 1 o'clock, same place. If there's anything I can help you with in between, you guys have my email, so let me know, and happy writing.
Thanks.
All right, see ya.
Bye.